I will now invite Arvind Iyer to summarize the first three INDICA symposiums. I must mention that Arvind co-curated the first two of these symposiums, which is on Vyākaraṇa and Chandas. With that, over to you, Arvind.
Thank you, Megji. Tatsat. So it is my pleasant and simultaneously demanding duty to summarize what a galaxy of speakers has wonderfully presented in three preceding symposia on the Vedāṅga-s of Vyākaraṇa, Nirukta, Chandas, which were held between October 2022 and July 2023. Megji has provided this wonderful framing in the Bharatiya Jnana Parampara of where each Vedāṅga fits. And we know that the Vedāṅgas were intended to preserve transmission of the Veda undistorted to the last syllable, and also in the way they are lived in active practice by the practitioners. The Vedāṅgas here relate intimately to language, all the three, Vyākaraṇa, Nirukta, and Chandas. And even beyond the Veda, today, if we were to participate in reciting the Bhagavad Gita, for instance, or reading a Shastra text, we would need to know where the verb in the sentence is, whether the word is correctly formed, for which we need the Vedāṅga of Vyākaraṇa, what the intent of the word and why it is aptly chosen, for which we would need the Vedāṅga of Nirukta, and where to pause while reciting, and what right cadences to adopt, for which we would need the Vedāṅga of Chandas. And these aren't limited to the Veda itself, but the entire Bharatiya Jnana Parampara, as I said. We are in the realms of meaning, yes, but also of word at the level of pure sound. This is to do with the sciences, but there is an immense amount of artistic creation which these subserve. And science and philosophy both are within their purview. Each of these is a discipline with a tremendously long history, exquisitely evolved terminology, and a long line of texts and commentarial traditions, which can seem daunting to someone approaching it at first. And so what the approach we have taken is Mahajano Yena Gatassa Panthaha. The way forward for us is to follow what great ones have trodden. So we had a galaxy of 15 odd speakers in three symposia. And it will be my duty now to summarize them to the extent possible. Whatever insight is available from these, the credit goes entirely to them. Any limitations are mine alone. We begin with the Vyākaraṇa Symposium, which is titled Vyākaraṇa as a meta-discipline of Indic thought. But here's what was meant by meta-discipline. To access the Bharatiya Jnana Parampara, the gateway is through Sanskritam, which mutually reinforces and nourishes the Bharatiya languages as well. And as in learning any other language, learning of grammar provides a secure foundation and guidance. Besides, the term grammar, even in ordinary usage, the World Cup is going on right now, and tomorrow, if I want to become a cricket commentator too, I might be asked if I know the grammar of cricket. So there is this underpinning of all disciplines which has the form of grammar, which was what this symposium attempted to cover through various speakers with different specializations. We began with Dr. Soumya Krishnapur, who is Chief Linguistics Officer at Vyoma Labs, Bengaluru, who offered this useful analogy of car driving versus being a car mechanic. any student of the Bharatiya Jnana Parampara needs to understand how Sanskritam and Vyākaraṇa work at the level of someone driving a car who may not know what's going on under the hood, for which we need specialist Vyākaraṇas. But the students in other disciplines as well could benefit from Vyākarana teaching, not at the level of specialists. And this requires this monumental intellectual masterpiece called the Ashtadhyayi of Panini to be taught in ways that are accessible and accommodate the needs of present-day students. And this has a long tradition over 1,000 years of condensing and adapting the Ashtadhyayi all the way from Dharmakirti, more recently in the medieval periods to Rajaraja Varma. And this was a roadmap for beginners, suggested roadmaps for beginners to find a gateway into Vyakarana and Sanskritam in general. Mahamahopadhyaya Korada Subramaniam ji, whom we have the pleasure of hearing today as well, offered us a zoomed out view of how Vyakarana, which is thought of as the discipline of words, of identifying sadhu shabdas or correctly formed words, has a broader scope going beyond single padas or words to how different padas relate in a sentence and compositions of broader extent, as in a Mahavakya or a Mahakavya. How these padas relate is through a concept called Akanksha, expectancy. All padas belonging in a Vakya raise an expectancy or a question about others and also satisfy. So this was an insight that is not limited in application to Sanskritam itself, but across Bharatiya languages, which is a characteristic feature of Mahamahopadhyayji's lectures, and also the way these symposia have been conceptualized too. He also spoke about the relation between word and meaning in different shastras, not limited to Vyakarana. More on this in future, in the later talks. Dr. Sharda Narayanan ji, who spoke of the light of Vyakarana in poetry, took us one level below even words or padas, to the level of syllables and sounds, where beauty is essential in poetry. And this talk, it establishes connections between the Vedāṅga-s as well. Today we will hear about the Śikṣā Vedāṅga on sounds and how they are to be properly uttered. We heard of games of indirectness in meaning. We often, in contemporary schooling, think of grammar and poetry as somehow separated, and how poetry is full of licenses departing from grammar. This talk was served to highlight how grammar sheds its light on poetry throughout. We also had glimpses of philosophy on the experience of poetry in terms of sphota, very loosely translated as explosion in the Desha Bhashas, but a unitary, indivisible experience, an experiential element as well, will keep recurring in the different presentations that we had. Speaking of experience, yoga is seen as something to be practiced, experienced, and in the popular perception seems separated from theory and textual study, which was a gap Dr. Jayaraman Mahadevanji addressed on the need for swadhyaya to accompany sadhana. And this swadhyaya is not freestyle self-study, but within a disciplined framework provided by a long line of commentators, disciplined by the Vedāṅgas like Vyakarana, and also Nyaya Shastra and Mimamsa Shastra, to determine the actual intent of the instruction. A strong case was made for Sanskrit learning to guard against misconceptions in yoga. In this symposium, finally, we had Satyan Sharmaji on the topic of how living this discipline has been across the ages, and who got to study it and how extensively. So the specific topic was accessibility of Vyākaraṇa studies across social classes. And this he established both in terms of how Smriti texts, which in the popular imagination are associated mostly with exclusion criteria, have been very inclusive when it comes to Vidyas, among the Ashtadasha Vidyas like Vyākaraṇa. And besides the Smriti texts themselves, he went on to demonstrate using colonial records, which are not off the bat assumed to be sympathetic to the Bharatiya Jnana Parampara, of how such Sanskrit learning was practiced widely across all social classes. The Nirukta Symposium is on subject matter which is conceptually very continuous with the Vyākaraṇa. And this, while beginners approach Sanskritam, and even in the popular view, a common belief is about, which also is founded in fact, is that in Sanskrit, words have many meanings. Oh, there are so many words even for one meaning. But is all of this arbitrary? Is there a discipline guiding them? And that discipline of Nirukta was where we got guidance from another set of eminent experts with decades of experience, even individually and between them. Speaking of the origins of Nirukta and its intimate association with the Veda, Dr. Vasant Kumar Bhattji introduced us to this compilation called the Nighantu, which is a resource for words in the Veda, which besides those having a direct meaning popularly understood in the world, tend to be paroksha or ati-paroksha, which would mean covert or hidden or opaque to varying degrees. The Nirukta of Yaskacharya has in its scope the authentication of relationships between words and meanings in sources like the Nighantu. And Professor Bhattji clarified that a better way to think of Nirukta than thinking that these were words of unknown meaning for which meaning was later assigned, it is more correct to think that Nirukta authenticated the relationship of a word that was known and meanings also known via a systematic process of word roots. Now, another important thing here is that besides word roots at the level of words, physical causes of an object also have a role in how meanings are assigned to words. This is not just about sounds and symbols on a page, but about the objects in the world themselves, which will have a lot of philosophical implications. There were a number of examples in the talk of, say, a word like samudra, which is sea, ocean, which which can be made sense of in multiple ways. An aggregation of a lot of fluid matter, something that brings joy when we are close to it, something that wets us, makes us wet, and so on. So Yaskacharya has been giving multiple alternative niruktis, which is a pluralistic approach which you can see across Indian knowledge systems, which is also illustrated in this talk. Professor Gauri Mahulekar ji focused on the topic of homonyms which is one word for many meanings, which, as she highlighted, is not often covered in typical school and college curricula. With a number of examples again. She spoke of mechanisms of word formation, how words can be formed from others. And here too, the scope was not limited to Sanskritam, but it spanned the Desha Bhashas. So an example of word formation by insertion or transformation of letters would be the word smarana, recollection in Sanskritam. In some of the Desha Bhashas becomes sumiran and so on. So study of such formations going all the way back to Nirukta was part of this talk. Importantly, she spoke of Yaskacharya's principles for choosing a basis for defining a meaning of a word when simple grammatical variations don't suffice. So there has been a checklist or a recipe provided by Yaska on how to look at similar syllables with words of known meanings and so on. So this approach was crisply delineated. So we had the privilege of Professor Mahamahopadhyaya Korada Subramaniam again, who also highlighted how Nirukta is to the rescue when Vyākaraṇa is at the edge, and how Nirukta represents the completion of Vyākaraṇa at the level of meaning in many ways. And when it comes to the relation between objects in the world and words composed of letters and symbols, we had heard from Professor Bhatt on root causes, physical causes in the world, as well as roots of words. And Mahamahopadhyaya ji here spoke of how Yaskacharya was a pioneer in speaking of 6 transformations an object can undergo. It is created, it grows, changes, decays, and finally undergoes destruction, and so on, and how these have had philosophical implications studied widely by Bhartrhari and others, not limiting this presentation, not from the Q&A section. There was a call for epistemic humility. When making sweeping statements like, oh, this particular word or statement is not attested in the Bharatiya Jnana Parampara, Mahamahopadhyaya ji urged us to recall that most ordinary mortals, we have not seen all shakhas of the Veda, and to make any statement requires deep, long study of the different Vedāṅga-s and Ashtadasha Vidyas. Megji had a presentation which dealt with the historical as well as the encyclopedic content that is seen in some of the Vedāṅga treatises, operating from the starting point of the earliest possible reasonable assumed date for Yaskacharya. Megji gave us a number of examples of in technology and science, starting with a technology like writing, of how the Nirukta of Yaskacharya gives us grounds to believe that these were known and practiced much before when common contemporary Western scholarship and popular books assume these technologies were first known in India. An example here is that Ashoka, who has been credited with mainstreaming alphabetic writing in India, comes after an attestation of the term grantha for a written manuscript from the time of which is attested in the Nirukta of Yaskacharya. The fact that the moon receives light from the sun, doesn't have light on its own, again, which has been credited with Greek philosophers for recognizing the first time also can be seen predated in references in Yaskacharya's Nirukta. Dr. Nagaraj Paturiji spoke of another pioneering aspect of Yaskacharya, namely the Adhideva, Adhiyajna, and Adhyatma levels of meaning. When there's a statement in the Veda, what it means at the level of the deities it refers, at the level of Vaidika sacrifice, and at the level of the inner experience. And he spoke of how the Adhibhuta or Adhibhautika gross physical meaning, which we include in this list now, actually builds on this basic listing by Yaskacharya, to whom this is owed, and on how modern thinking and scholarship seems to be limited to the gross physical Adhibhautika, meaning to the exclusion of all others. To highlight this, he left us with this fascinating historical and philosophical question: was the Soma we hear of so much in the Veda, was it just a substance? After Vyākaraṇa and Nirukta, we come to Chandas, which is one of the which of these symposia was the one with the most experiential element, with a lot of recitation, live demonstration, singing, and hence I would invite you to visit the lecture recordings in full, which is true also of the talks I had spoken of previously. Here we speak of the level of sound itself. At the start of this presentation, I had cited a verse fragment, Mahajano yena gatassa panthaha. We follow where the great ones have tread. So, Mahajano yena gatassa panthaha rolls off the tongue, dances off the tongue, because it follows this pattern of syllables, nanana nana, nanana nana, which is a meter called Upendra Vajra in the Upajati class. Meters of the sort which are systematized in this discipline called Chandas or prosody. And the best way to approach these is via live demonstrations, which is how this began with Raghavendra Hebbalaluji and Sri Lalita Rupanagudiji, who provided a classification and a survey of a variety of meters commonly seen in Sanskritam literature, Anushtup, Vasantatilaka, Upajati, Ayagiti, to name a few. And importantly, the examples he cited came from Kavya classics. It's not that all that beginners can access is something artificially simplified and rudimentary. The best that our Jnana Parampara has to offer can be immediately glimpsed and enjoyed and simply heard and savored at the level of sound, which was wonderfully done in this symposium, in this presentation. Perhaps the most common meter in Sanskritam literature is Anushtup. Megji's invocations, beginning with Saraswati Namastubhyam Varade Kamarupini, going all the way till Purana, Nyaya, Mimamsa, and so on. All of these were in the meter called Anushtup, but which is common, but it is elusive to characterize, and which was the scientific problem tackled by GSS Bhuttiji over decades of research. His work was presented in the language of necessary and sufficient conditions, or in the language of the Nyaya Sutra or Lakshana Pariksha of Ativyapti, Anavyapti, and so on. So this scientific approach was both inspirational and of immense interest to those with this bent of mind. Though this work wasn't just formal and technical, it was also about the the philosophical question of what is rhythm and how rhythm elements can be identified in designing meters that sound pleasant. Designing meters not just by taking long and short syllables, na and na, and simply arranging them randomly and see what works, but a more systematic approach to that. So anyone interested in these is invited to the talk. Shashikiran BN G spoke of a work called the Chandogati from the 20th century, written in Kannada by the scholar Sediyapu Krishna Bhatta, with an inspiring biographies in his own right, someone visually impaired and autodidact who learned by listening to radio broadcasts and so on. Given the immense scope from science and art, Sediyapu Krishna Bhatta also seems to have provided accommodations and handholding for beginners. For example, the way I illustrated what a meter could be with na 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 with monosyllables, that is a training hack which Krishna Bhatta himself speaks of. Importantly, this is a work written in Kannada, of course, but having in scope Sanskrit literature, is on the natural rhythms, the gati or the gait in English of meters on the one hand and languages on the other, and how they can mutually reinforce to present an unforgettable experience. Dr. Shankar Rajaraman, one of the well-known poets of our time, spoke of Chitrakavya, which might, thanks to our default Deshabhasha understanding, be thought of as picture poetry of arranging syllables in a verse such that they form patterns when traced in certain ways. But he made a case with a number of examples of how it is wonder poetry. The marvel of Chitrakavya, while functioning within very daunting seeming constraints, was on amazing display in this talk. And in spirit as well, the deftness of the rule conflict resolutions, or in Dr. Shankar's own words, samarasya, or harmony, in a manner of speaking, between conflicting rules with very deft and expedient means that don't play fast and loose with any of the rules, was on inspirational display here. Finally, we had Dr. Shrikant Krishnamurthy in a presentation that stood out in the sheer variety of languages, of sources, historical periods, meters, also ragas, which I don't put on the slide. So a dramatic demonstration earlier at the start of this was the Sanskrit meter Shatula Vikriditam in an English verse translation of a Sanskrit verse, and so on. And he, with a mix of original works and translations, he drew on sources like Mankutimana Kagga from 20th century Kannada, Gaha Satyasai, very canonical Prakrit work, Sangam Tamil poems in Tamil itself, Tirupavai, Andadi style of devotional compositions, Chalisas, Doha, etc. in Hindi, Awadhi, and so on. Even film music wasn't excluded. So truly, this symposium was capped with a presentation that lived up to the name of the symposium, which is Cadences of Indic Thought across barriers of language, historical period, and so on. So finally, some things which stood out as learnings from across these Vedāṅga symposia, and which I'm sure will be reinforced in the talks to come as well, is that while these are all strong disciplines in their own right, the texts, they have this encyclopedic time capsule-like quality. They speak not just of words and sounds, but about objects in the world, anything under the sun and beyond. Their counterparts in contemporary knowledge systems are still catching up in many ways. As we saw at the beginning, Vyākaraṇa is more than grammar, Chandas more than just prosody for verse. And there is intellectual motivation galore for students across disciplines in the present day to study them. Finally, there is an experiential element which is highlighted all the more in the talks at the Chandas Symposium. And there is room for recreational besides formal learning. And for all of this, this is a point which was highlighted at the Vyākaraṇa Symposium itself by Dr. Soumya Krishnapur and Dr. Jayaraman Mahadevan. What is called for is a mix of both humility and enthusiasm. These are all disciplines and subjects to be learned cheerfully, but not taken lightly. With that, I would like to thank Meghji and INDICA for the opportunity, and most of all, the speakers in all these symposia to whom all of this learning is owed. Om Tat Sat.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Arvind. That was wonderfully summarized and so on time. It is dot 8:45, and like always, you have shown rigor and structure in your presentation.